right, just I want to make sure to try to stick to the schedule so everyone gets the time they need. Thank you guys for passing those out. Okay, so this session starts, I'm just going to go ahead and get it started. It's Beyond Crowdsourcing. There's a subtitle to that, right? Did you want me just to do that?
Trying to remember, what was our subtitle? Sharing Responsibility and Empowering Participants was our subtitle.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if you want to scoot down forward, feel free. It's kind of losing some people.
We don't bite. We try not to.
Okay, I'll let these people kind of get out before I interview. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce them so we can get started. David McKenzie works as Associate Director for Interpretive Resources, including digital, at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Because he has too much free time on his hands, he is also pursuing a PhD in history at George Mason University. Previously, he worked as a history interpreter at the Alamo, a content developer at an exhibition design firm, and in a wide-ranging interpretive position at a small historical society. Eric Schmaltz is the Citizen History Community Manager at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. His main responsibilities include assisting citizen historians with project research, reviewing article contributions to the website, and engaging the community through personal and digital outreach. Before joining the History Unfolded project, Eric taught social studies for 4 years at Monticello High School in Central Virginia.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming out today. And Eric and I are going to talk about our different projects that we did at Ford's Theater and the Holocaust Museum. But most in particularly, we're going to talk about some of the differences between them. So it's going to be more of a dialogue between the two of us, and talking about what we did in comparison. So, kind of our big takeaway is the idea of process versus the end product. And when you're planning a digital project, especially a digital primary source project, are you really emphasizing the process of building the collection, building your website, or the end product? And this particularly is important with regard to citizen history. And are you building what infrastructure are you building? So you're really thinking about what your objectives are for the project. Is it about the participation of the audience, of your users, your citizens, in creating the project, or is it about how they're going to use it in the end? So I'm just going to briefly introduce our two projects. So Remembering Lincoln is a website that Ford's Theater launched in March of 2015. This was funded by IMLS. And Remembering Lincoln was to bring together people's responses to the Lincoln assassination from the time that it took place. Overall goal was to localize and personalize this national event, to really make it about about how people in different communities responded to it. So that's the big objective.
And the History Unfolded project is one of our initiatives at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. We're asking people around the country to look in their local newspaper collections, on microfilm at libraries and archives, and online through online databases to see how their local communities reported on select events of the Holocaust that we've identified for research on our website. So I'd encourage you during this presentation to visit our website. We passed out some papers. If you didn't get one, you can get one during the presentation. It's newspapers.ushmm.org. And we used the hashtag History Unfolded. So the best way to learn about the site is just kind of browse through it and see what's going on there. Our primary audience are teachers and students, and so we're very excited to get them out of the classroom, ideally, and into libraries and archives, looking how their community reported on the Holocaust, uploading their article findings to our website. So we're asking for specific metadata, and I review that metadata for accuracy and relevance, and then include it into the database. So I imagine most of us have heard of crowdsourcing before. Just by a show of hands and yes, how many people have heard of citizen history? Raise your hand if you've heard of citizen history. So most of us have, but not everyone. I'm going to talk about some of the differences briefly. This Venn diagram comes from my supervisor at the museum, Michael Haley Goldman, and it shows that there's a lot of overlap between citizen history and crowdsourcing. In the center, you see that they both rely on the efforts of volunteers. They are projects that are based in quality research. The communities are very actively involved, and you have to do a lot of outreach in part to let the community know that we are asking for their help. The difference primarily is in the focus area. So crowdsourcing has a primary focus in collections and access. And citizen history, what we're doing for this project, History Unfolded, the primary goal is research and education. In particular, we want students and teachers to have a high quality research experience to be like historians, actually doing authentic historical research for an ongoing historical question. And I want to point out a very fine point that it's not to say that one is better than the other. I think citizen history has kind of become the buzzword. You know, if you're, it's almost like the next best thing to do out there. It really depends on what the goals are.
So along those lines, the question of, what are your objectives? So like I mentioned earlier when I introduced Remembering Lincoln, at Fords, it was really about connecting people with these local and personal stories of the Lincoln assassination. So we were really looking to engage people. We couldn't really articulate it at the time. We talked a lot in our grant application to IMLS about crowdsourcing and getting people involved. And we've done a little bit of that, and we would really like to. But even when we were doing our user research, research with our citizens, with our constituents, for the project, we defined teachers, students, scholars, and enthusiasts as our main audience groups. And really, overall, people were talking about the end product. So that was what we really emphasized in building our infrastructure, was the end product. We wound up also, because we had a much more limited budget than we had originally hoped, really prioritizing the features of the end product at the expense of anything that could really come in either crowdsourcing or citizen history.
For History Unfolded, we have three primary audiences, teachers, and through the teachers, students, and then lifelong learners. And our goals include to reach 20% of high school students around the nation by the end of our intake process for the project, which is in spring 2018. As you can probably imagine, it's quite an ambitious goal that we're working on. It's somewhat aspirational, but we really want that our participants have a very high quality experience, and we also want to challenge assumptions that people have had about the Holocaust. I really want to emphasize that we created the Citizen History Project because there was a need in the scholarship to ask that question of what did Americans know or have the opportunity to know about the Holocaust, and did anybody do anything? There seems to be this idea out in popular culture that perhaps Americans didn't know anything and Americans didn't do anything. So we started with that goal as how are we going to address this question? Citizen history was the best way to do it because we have a limited staff, and since we want to challenge people's assumptions while they're learning about the Holocaust, why not get as many students and teachers around the country to actually engage in this project? And it's been fascinating for me as the community manager for the project to realize we're getting a lot of lifelong learners, but our primary objective is to reach teachers and students. So I always try to stay focused on that as we go on and do our outreach efforts. So the other big question that I think both of us have found in the process of working on our project is you really need to focus on what is your time frame. For our project, we are focusing on spring 2018 because it coincides with the opening of a special exhibition on Americans in the Holocaust. We're hopeful, and one of our other project goals is that some of the information from this project will actually be included in that special exhibition. So there might be some newspaper articles that are featured physically in the exhibition or digitally. And so for us, it's very exciting to be able to tell teachers that you can do this project multiple times in your classroom. We have the ability to do that, and we find that we're getting more traction from teachers because they don't want to invest a lot of time in a project for only one semester. And I think in some ways, if we could offer this, and I'm trying to think in my head, what do we do beyond spring 2018? Because teachers will still want to be invested one way or another. But we also didn't want the project to last forever. There's a tendency, as you may know, in the industry for projects to just kind of die a slow, painful death. And so we want this endpoint in spring 2018 in order to take what we've learned from this project and apply it to something next.
It was with us at Ford's Theater, we had a very specific date in mind, which was April 2015, the 150th anniversary of the Lincoln assassination. And Ford's Theater got the grant for the project. I was initially hired as the project manager for it and have since taken on other roles. But we started in October 2013. And we had initially a planning grant that we wound up stretching to be the grant to build the entire thing as well. So, really, we had a pretty condensed time frame. Also, the time frame of what we are looking at, even the materials that we're looking at, was also from a very short time period. So, in the end, again, we really wound up emphasizing a lot of the end product. We did a lot of institutional outreach. We could do a lot more. If any of your institutions have materials that relate to how people responded to the Lincoln assassination, please let me know. We are still looking for materials. But we mainly wound up working more with institutions to digitize their materials. And in part, that was because we wanted to have a pretty good critical mass up for that 150th anniversary. We held our initial planning meeting on the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, ironically, and looked at a lot of websites that went up around the Kennedy assassination. 6 months later, asked how many people are still using those. So we had, again, a bit different of a time frame. So that raises the other question of what is your chronological scope and what kinds of sources are available? That's something that our projects have a little differently. As I mentioned with Remembering Lincoln, it's really around one main event, the assassination of Lincoln. It's an event that's very important in US and world history that a lot of people had a lot of emotions about and that really resonates today. Some people call it the last shot of the Civil War. Really, it was the first shot of a white backlash against African American rights in Reconstruction. So, this is a really significant event, and yet at the same time, it is one event. So, also, it's an event in the 19th century versus an event in the 20th century. So, we have different types of materials available, and really, in some ways, a lot fewer. So in talking with teachers, for example, we did have one teacher who brought students into local archives around Milwaukee. He had to call around to several to find materials because it is, again, around one event that took place 150 years ago. And other teachers have said, you know what? If I was doing that, I would give up. I really don't have time to do that. So we wound up building some participatory structures, mainly through Google Forms. Simply, we had a teacher who did a teaching module about going into local archives, another one about using Chronicling America from the Library of Congress, and another about transcription of primary source materials. But really, we've only had that one teacher thus far who's taken students into local archives.
For our project, we're specifically focusing on newspapers during the 1930s and the 1940s. The project range goes from 1933 to 1945. And the unfortunate part for us is that Chronicling America and a lot of the copyright laws in the country at the time, as you may know, they take effect around 1922 beyond to the present day. And so it's very difficult for some of our teachers and students to get access to online material for free or material otherwise. And on the other hand, though, because it goes back to our project goal, is that we want to create an authentic experience for our students. we have a great need to get access to those sources. And so the libraries do have them available for free. And so the teachers that have been working with the project know that this isn't busy work. They're doing real work for us, and they get really excited. And so we really try to emphasize that in-person, at the library archive research. And we've been very impressed that not only are the students motivated, that they know that they're doing authentic research, but we've been surprised at how much they love working with microfilm. I mean, this really, we had no idea. But they love the hands-on research. They talk about being able to see what's going on in the community, about the cows in the fields and the advertisements at the time. And it's been a really powerful experience for them as well. So we've been responding to that. And so when I do a lot of communication with our teachers, and we talk about, yes, it's very challenging maybe to get your students into the library, but they're doing real research, and this is the kind of work, hands-on project work, that I know you want to be doing your students, and that's been very successful for us. So another big question that comes up, and I think this is one of the most important ones, especially if you're at an institution where you're thinking about maybe doing some more crowdsourcing or something along the lines of full citizen history, is even before you get to the proposal state, think about what staff resources can you commit. And it's a lot of different considerations. I have a job at the Holocaust Museum because my colleagues before me decided that in order to be successful at this project, we needed someone who works full-time on History Unfolded. I have no other job. So my calendar can be really confusing because when people schedule my meetings, it's always History Unfolded, XYZ, and they're doing other things. But the beauty of it is that I get time to address the community when they have questions, when they're curious about doing the project, and I really try to emphasize that. So one thing I would say is we've learned that having a community manager dedicated to the project is huge. But then you also really need to consider the time and the money and the resources for the rest of the staff. And I think some of that also goes into the buy-in from stakeholders and other folks to know that this is something that has a legitimate purpose and that we want to do. So it does take a lot of advanced planning, and we did a lot of research. This is not the first citizen project we've done. We did one on a smaller scale on the Children of the Woods ghetto, and so we learned a lot from that and are building on it.
Whereas at Ford's Theater, my job started mainly on remembering Lincoln, but I was doing other stuff, also responsible for us launching on Google Arts and Culture 3 weeks after we launched Remembering Lincoln, right before the 150th anniversary of the assassination. Also dealing with the education department's website content, and sometimes helping to lead tours. And so, over time, my role has really evolved. And so I would say now I probably spend a few hours a month on Remembering Lincoln, if that. We're in the midst of a website redesign right now, so doing a lot with the historical and educational content on the website, wrangling a lot of different content on that, and also I'm now doing exhibitions at Ford's Theater. So really institutionally we realized we didn't really have the resources to commit. So as much as we would love to be doing more crowdsourcing, we really put up some teaching modules, and that's where we've gone, because really institutionally, as part of our overall digital strategy, Remembering Lincoln is a part of it, but it's also not a big part of it. We have a lot of other initiatives going on at the moment. So then also is a question of how do we define participation? So, again, for us, it was really about the end product in the end. And this is, again, I could not have articulated this 2 or 3 years ago when we were starting the project. It really took a long time, a lot of conversations with a lot of other people to really realize that was what we were doing, is we were building the end product. We were defining participation as engagement with those resources. So using those resources in the classroom, or people connecting with those resources, connecting with their communities, how their communities responded to this major event. So again, we've done a few teaching modules for participation. We've had some teachers do transcriptions with their classrooms, but the engagement is really defined by the end product.
So I think for us, this has been one of our ongoing challenges, to be completely honest, that we had a goal that said we were going to work to get 20% of students around the country to participate in History Unfolded. We talked about engaging 20% of students and to challenge their assumption about the Holocaust. But if you've worked with an online project before, you would know there are many different ways to measure engagement. So we've had a lot of internal discussions about, does that mean creating an account? Does that mean submitting an article? Does that mean going to the website and learning something new about the Holocaust that you've never known before? And I don't think, to be honest again, we've completely answered that question. But I do think that because 20% of students is very aspirational and we may not reach that goal, we've been trying to focus more on that positive experience for students and teachers throughout the country, really working with them to learn what they need most in the classroom. And one of the great privileges of my job is to be able to hear feedback from the community on a regular basis, since I have the time to do it, to know just how meaningful the project has been for teachers and students, some who identify due to family members or personal histories at a time period, others who are just really excited about doing authentic research, those who were shocked to find articles on the front page, people who are comparing the situation to the modern day genocides and crises that we have today and making new connections. And so what we constantly try to do is be aware of that feedback, to really know our audience well, and then respond and continue to hone in on what does it mean to engage our audience.
Right, so this is perfect timing because Trish gave us our time for questions prompt less than a minute ago. So thank you, everybody. This has been a very brief overview, but love some questions.
Eric, I wonder if you could speak to the process of reaching out to high schools, to teachers. 20% of U.S. high school students is got to be a huge number. What has your strategy been for reaching all those people?
If you could fully answer that question, I think there would be a lot of money for you, because I don't have the complete answer, but I can tell you some things that we've been doing, and I'm actually giving a presentation tomorrow morning at 9 where I'm talking specifically about History Unfolded, if any of you are interested, and some of those specific strategies. I think one thing, it goes back to knowing the audience well. As a former classroom teacher, my favorite example is the institutions that create these wonderful, and they truly are wonderful lesson plans, but they extend to a week or two, and they're on something like the inaugural gowns. And as a social studies teacher teaching high school, American history, there's just no way I can devote 2 weeks of my curriculum time to that. So we try to be very realistic about what we can do. We've made a website that we think is very accessible and easy to use. We've gotten feedback from teachers saying that this is something that can pretty much run itself if you do a little bit of research and have the students get started. And the big thing I tell them is contact the librarian because they'll help you. And then what I did was I had some of those teachers who are willing to share that information on a Google Hangout, and then we presented that online, and we have that on our blog. So hearing from other teachers that this is realistic, that it's doable. We were fortunate to work very heavily with our marketing office. So those handouts that we passed out come from our office. We did a major email campaign to try to reach teachers across the entire country. So we did have to pay for email lists. But we're just trying to spread the word that way. We've also been very fortunate to get press coverage today about the project. But a lot of what I do is sort of ground level, kind of almost grassroots type spreading the word, telling people individually, and then telling them, please go back to your local community and tell your professors, tell your teachers, tell your colleagues. And I think even though that doesn't necessarily reach as many people about the existence of the project, we're getting a lot of people who actually respond that way. And so it is aspirational, but it's scaling up. We've been trying to do, and we are fortunate we have several years to do it. So I think more and more people are finding about it every year.
Does a question in the audience? So what I noticed when you were talking about staff resources, there seemed to be a big difference. And what you were describing, that you got to solely work on the project, and then David, that you all of a sudden have had lots of other responsibilities. I'm assuming because of the smaller staff, or.
Yep.
So I guess for the small museums in the audience, do you kind of have like a streamline of what you try to make sure you do, or what's important to make sure that this sustains itself as best it can on limited resources?
I think that's a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer to that. I mean, this has also been a mind shift for the institution, admittedly, because the institution was very used to, produced a few small exhibitions, but also Ford's Theater Society is a theater. So you produce a play, you take it down, and that's it. Whereas, sustaining this on an ongoing basis, both financially as well as staff-wise, I think the main advice I would have is to really know what your objective is, and to really understand that staff time. I think that was what a lot of us, myself included, didn't really realize. Just the technology is not the difficult part. It's the staff time to work on the content. I mean, even for the end result for the content, and then especially for any crowdsourcing or citizen history aspect, there's a lot of staff time involved. I mean, the fact that Eric's job is that. So I think it's really defining. Okay, if you are making the objective to be, this is a citizen history project, this is something we really want to do, and we really want to make this the first and foremost aspect of it, know that you need to devote the staff time.
Other questions? Oh. Here you go. This is our last question.
Do you have any resources that you would recommend on doing a crowdsourcing project?
Well, for us, a couple of things. One, that we started, again, we're thinking more citizen history, but a lot of what we've learned has been in citizen science, which has been much more well established, almost a couple hundred years now. And so we're constantly looking at some of the scholarship coming out of citizen science in terms of what motivates people to do that work. We're also looking at some of our partner institutions that do those types of projects. A really good organization, the Zooniverse, and so they do lots of projects on a regular basis. Again, for us as an institution, we have, if you want to take a look at our Children of the Woods Ghetto project that we've done before this, and some of the other ones, we built a lot on that, and we've also made some of that information available in previous talks. Some of my colleagues have talked about that as well. So it very much is trying to learn from previous institutions and projects. I think the other thing I've learned over time is to realize there is no cookie cutter model either. At the same time, you want to learn, but you don't want to say just because it worked for this institution at this time, it will work exactly the same way for us. And so I think it's a combination of being aware of the past practices, but then also adapting to your institution, the reality, and your audience.